Welcome back to Two Bees in a Pod. This week we are talking about Juneteenth, which is a federal holiday in America and celebrated on June 19th. So a brief history about the holiday for those who are not aware. On January 1, 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation was issued, which, was intended to end slavery in America after the Union won the Civil War. However, in certain places, like unfortunately Texas, there were still Confederate strongholds where slavery persisted even after that Emancipation Proclamation, and literally Union soldiers had to come in and enforce that proclamation. Juneteenth is celebrated on June 19th because it took over 2 years. So June 19th, 1865 is when the Union troops arrived in Galveston, Texas, which was one of the last bastions of slavery. And then they declared that the enslaved African Americans in the state of Texas, which was about 250,000 people at that time, were free. So that's the origin of that holiday. The African American community in Galveston and elsewhere, they started celebrating like immediately the next year. They had their first Juneteenth celebration. So that is the history of that holiday.
A lot of the Juneteenth celebrations, because of segregated facilities, a lot of Juneteenth celebrations tended to be like outdoor in public spaces, baseball fields, rodeos, and fishing. And I think that it's very important to remember these things because whenever we talk about racism, especially to African immigrants or African immigrants who don't live in the US, I think people don't understand how much racism and slavery are woven into the fabric and the DNA of this country, because at every turn you will find that people's lives were affected in big and small ways by slavery. Emancipation Park in Houston. So it was purchased by 4 people. It was 10 acres. And they purchased it in 1872 for $800. And from 1922 to 1940, it was the only public park in Houston open to African Americans.
Wow.
Like something... I think it's strange that for as big of, like, it was a huge thing. The fact that America had to go through a civil war to even get the Emancipation Proclamation, and that for 2 years, the Confederate soldiers in Texas knew this, but kept people enslaved until the Union soldiers showed up in 1865 before they let go of the enslaved people. And the fact that two Texas representatives voted against making it a federal holiday in 2021 it shouldn't be mind-blowing. It's not mind-blowing, but it is.
Like, how are you not ashamed of voting against something like that? Like, what was the rationale? Like, I haven't even looked into I don't know if they make statements when they vote against things, but it's like, why would you vote against making Juneteenth a federal holiday? Like, what's your reasoning? It's not worth celebrating?
Oftentimes, I think, like, when they were talking about critical race theory and not wanting, they said, oh, the white kids will feel guilty. I think that we talk about slavery sometimes and Jim Crow and segregation like it was such a long time ago. It was not. Ruby Bridges she's in her 60s or 70s. She's not that old. And people are afraid they'll recognize themselves or their parents or grandparents in those pictures. And I guess it's just a projection to not look in the mirror and like face your history. Nobody's saying that you did it. They're not blaming you for it. But if you don't want people to talk about it, then maybe you're responsible for that.
Yeah. I mean, and honestly, like, we are just asking, or Black Americans are just asking for like the basic facts to be shared in school. Because if we even want to go deeper, after the Emancipation Proclamation, whether it's in 1863 or the one in 1865, it's not like Black people were just
free.
They were just free to go and have land, start their own businesses. No, like, if you have recently watched the movie Sinners, and if you haven't, what the hell is wrong with you? But you can see that that movie was set in early 90s, and you see the Black people who are sharecroppers. And I love that the movie talks about the currency. There's a big deal made in one of the scenes, or a couple of scenes, about the currency that the Black people were using to pay, because there was plantation currency, and then there was like actual US dollars. So that just goes to show, like, even after slavery was officially ended, it's not like things just magically became, everything was all good, everybody has opportunity. Like, no.
It took another 100 years after slavery to get the Civil Rights Act. And it's like once slavery ended, there was like a little bit of a window where things started to look up. And then at the turn of the early 1900s, we had Jim Crow popping up in southern states and spreading everywhere. And it's like, we're not sure how much longer we're going to be covered by the Civil Rights Act today. And yeah, so it's like, it's not that long ago, right? I listened to, I think it was maybe Planet Money, where they were talking about the effects of Jim Crow, and things that people don't think about. When we learn about all these great inventions, they're always attributed to some Caucasian. But if you think about it, who was doing laundry, for instance, who would have benefited from a washing machine? A lot of these patents were developed by Black people. But when Jim Crow started creeping in, Black people couldn't submit patents, so they needed a white person to cover, to sign over on it for it to be accepted. But by the time Jim Crow fully kicked in, the number of patent applications significantly dropped. And I think that we are all worse for that because we all benefited from these inventions. And who knows what other inventions would have come across if it wasn't for the rot of segregation and racism with the advent of Jim Crow.
Exactly. And we're going to have 2 separate guests on talking about Juneteenth and their experiences and the history of Juneteenth. And one of our guests actually mentions Galveston having, something like a Black Wall Street. And in other cities across America, after, again, the Emancipation Proclamation through the Civil Rights era, Black people, building from the ground up, these prosperous neighborhoods, towns, and guess what happened to those towns? Like, if you haven't heard about, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and there are other cities like that, I'm forgetting the name. There's one notorious one in Georgia that, like, I don't know if it was the Klan or just like white mobs literally just burned to the ground, like, drove people out. It's like, even when Black people were like, okay, let's go and make our own space, our own communities, build up our economies. Like, no, like, they were not left alone to prosper.
And even when it was not the Klan, there was another form of the Klan, aka the government. Because if you look at the history of the highways, the interstate system we love so much, in a lot of cities, the interstate went through what was a Black neighborhood. It happened in Detroit. It happened in Chicago. A lot of Black communities were broken up because of the interstate system. So even if it was not the Klan, Black people have still had to pay with their bodies, with their wealth.
Health?
Their health. Black people went to war and then they came back and they could not get the benefits of the GI Bill, which we all know about home ownership and how it's used as a tool for wealth. And an entire generation of Black people were shut out of that.
Yeah. Man, I wish we had done an episode where we just talked about sinners, because I'm not saying that people should get their history from a movie, but that movie, it does such a good job, like, on many fronts. Like, one thing that was kind of jarring to me was, the brothers buy this old, I think it was a mill or some kind of industrial building where they're going to set up their juke joint.
Oh, the
they
slaughterhouse?
buy it from, was it a slaughterhouse? Ooh, I feel like that was the foreshadowing. Anyway,
Yes.
They bought it from this Grand Wizard, Clan member guy. And at the beginning, he's like acting like he's all about business. This is a spoiler alert. If you haven't watched the movie, maybe skip. But he's acting like, I don't see race when it comes to money type of thing. And he's like, oh, those were the old days. He takes their money. And then we find out later on in the movie that he's actually planning to bring his clan boys and, shoot up the place. And it's so insidious. And I know it's a movie, but you cannot tell me that things like that were not happening. So it's like, even when, that's just a perfect example, like, even when Black people, like, try to set up their own thing, it's like, you people will not leave them be, not leave them prosper. How can you sell a property to somebody and you want to come the next day
after taking their money and kill
and shoot
them?
up the place? Like,
Yeah.
Anyway.
It was because he asked a question. I think he noticed a stain on the floor and he asked and he said something. And then his nephew was the person who said that that's what it was.
It was a slaughterhouse.
Yeah.
I need to watch that movie at least 3 more times to get all the little things. Yeah.
But yeah, and I guess one last thing is that even if America doesn't want to celebrate Juneteenth, it is said that the Black Seminole descendants in El Nacimiento de los Negros in Mexico have observed June 19 as Dia de los Negros since the 1870s.
Oh, I love that. Okay, that's really heartwarming and good to know. Yeah, because I've heard about, Black Mexicans, and of course they're not talked about enough and underrepresented, but that's good to see that they're celebrating. Nice. Okay, well, we hope you enjoy the episode. We hope, you learn a lot from our guests. I know I have, and I'll definitely, do my own additional reading to learn more about Juneteenth and Galveston specifically, because I feel like I owe it to myself if I live in Houston to learn more.
I'm going to be like a YouTuber. We'll put more information down in the description box.
The description. Okay. And don't forget, our June book of the month is These Letters End in Tears by Musite G. Xavier. So we'll be discussing that on the last episode of the month. And if you are not following us on Instagram, what on earth are you doing? Give us a follow at 2B's Pod and subscribe on YouTube and Spotify or your favorite podcast streaming platform. Tell a friend to tell a friend. In honor of Juneteenth, as we promised, we have a special guest with us to talk about the holiday, the tradition, her own personal family tradition, and the history. So welcome, Miss Creshonda Collins. We're so honored to have you joining us today. And
Thank you.
Creshonda is a Galveston native, which is why she's perfect, to talk to us about Juneteenth. She was born and raised in Galveston, and she is a proud alumni of Ball High School, and she is also the runner-up of Miss Juneteenth pageant 2005-2006. Perfect. We have Juneteenth royalty with us in the house. Yes. Galveston royalty. And Creshonda is a residency coordinator, and outside of work, she enjoys spending time with her 15-year-old son and her family. So Creshonda, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
So do you remember when and how you first learned about Juneteenth?
Honestly, learned about it and celebrating it. Are two different things. So I remember celebrating it all my life. I don't remember learning the true history of it until about 8th grade, maybe 9th grade. I was much older. So I can honestly say I do remember a little bit of both. So celebrating it, going to the parades all the time, getting a new outfit all the time. And I remember learning about the history in the 8th grade. So many moons ago, maybe 2004.
So was it you learned as part of your school curriculum, or did you
Not
learn
at all.
Formally? Oh.
Not at all. Never discussed in school, but more so with my parents. My mom and my grandmother was always a celebration type situation. But with my dad, it was met with some aggression, oh, we got the word late. Wow, we shouldn't be celebrating. I'm like, let us enjoy this. I enjoyed Juneteenth.
Okay. So we'll talk more about that because I'm interested, in your dad's perspective.
Yes.
Okay, so
he was just a different kind of guy in general. He's super pro-Black, but super like everything is no, So his whole thing would be, we're excited, we're ready to go to the parade, but he knew at that time we didn't really understand what we were celebrating. He knew we just were excited to go and be outside playing, normal kid stuff. They don't do that anymore, but normal kid stuff. So I just remember him one day coming in, we running out the door trying to get to the parade, and my grandma like, well, hurry up, get her shoe, we're running. And he's like, everybody's always so excited, but why are we celebrating the fact that we got the word 2 years late? And I'm like, okay, why are you so angry? But once I got older, I understood him being upset about it. But, in the 8th grade, I don't really know. But by the time I was a freshman, I guess after that day, he just knew, like, I need to teach my kids, really what was going on and what Juneteenth is truly about. So I remember him telling us, the president signed this executive order and, nobody thought to come tell us in Texas until 1865 when it was, an executive order in 1863. And he was
Mhm.
like, you got to understand, we're still fighting for so much. And, we're just not, you barely, touching the surface. And I was like, okay. And at that moment, I knew like I need to know more. And I appreciated him, turning that light bulb on for me because I really didn't at the time understand what we were celebrating. And now I do know.
Okay. Shout out to Dad.
Right? Goodness.
And Bilala, what about you? Do you remember when you first learned about Juneteenth?
I've been thinking. I'm really embarrassed. I
Don't be.
think I heard about it maybe when I was an undergrad in Arkansas. But beyond people talking about Juneteenth and red Kool-Aid, I did not think any more of it. And then I moved to Houston and I went to an HBCU. So I feel like I heard about it, but still did not do any more research that was necessary until maybe 2020 when everybody started talking about it. Then I actually took time to get to know. But I did know like that Juneteenth was like in June and that there was always a parade, especially in Houston. I want to say Fort Ward, Third Ward, somewhere around TSU probably. That's where they would have the parade. And I guess now that there's Emancipation Park, then it's in that neighborhood and in that area. But knowing and learning and understanding definitely happened in the last couple of years.
So for me, I guess I got lucky because I didn't know anything about Juneteenth, but I dated this guy in California. I mean, it's 10 years ago at least now. Yeah, we met like 12 years ago, and his grandmother was very, very like involved in her community out in LA, and she would have a Juneteenth celebration. She would throw it for the community like every year. So that's where, and she was like the only one that I'd ever heard, yeah. So that's where I first learned about Juneteenth because she was really, really serious about it. So I'm definitely, grateful that I was able to get that knowledge. And then, yeah, of course, with the rest of America, like after 20, when it became a national holiday. But yeah, it's just because I happened to be dating that guy whose grandmother was like super into it. But otherwise, like I honestly never heard outside of her and her family, I never heard anybody talking about it or celebrating. Yeah.
Were they from Texas?
No, they weren't, which is weird. Yeah, they were not from Texas. I want to say they were from New Jersey.
Okay.
You sure Granny had no Texas ties whatsoever?
She may have.
And I'm only saying that because I have aunts, like great aunts, that live in LA now, and they still celebrate with their kids, and all of their kids were born and raised in LA, in California. So that's why I asked that.
Okay, maybe I don't know. I'm not gonna text him, but I was gonna say I'll find out. I guess
I was gonna say, is this the part where we find out that y'all are cousins?
Right?
You never know.
Imagine.
You never know.
I should. Hey, have you heard of a Creshonda Collins? He will be like, "Oh, that's my cousin."
And there it goes again.
No contacts.
Wow.
Okay, so Creshonda, can you just tell us a little bit about what your family did when you were younger? Like, what was your tradition of celebrating?
Honey, that's my favorite part. So we knew, school usually used to end around the end of May. And so everybody's gone about their business. School is over and you go home for the summer, whatever. I always remember around the 1st or maybe the 5th of June, early June, my grandmother would be like, and then she's Granny. I'm trying not to say Granny, but that's my Granny. My Granny used to be like, y'all, let's go to, it was Wieners back then. Let's go to Wieners, So we knew we were going shopping. We knew we were getting a new outfit. We knew, and most of the time I was kind of always in the parades too. So I was always in some dance team or something that was in the parade. But if I wasn't, I knew I was going to get a new outfit. I knew when the parade would be coming, and it was always summer. So, we staying up all night. My cousins probably coming over, and my granny was probably in the kitchen seasoning some food, getting the meat ready. Because we were definitely having a barbecue. She always would go to the store and pick out the sweetest watermelon, which is something I never learned how to do because I still cannot find the sweet watermelons my granny used to find. I don't even think they make sweet I don't know what they're doing. But my granny always found the sweetest watermelon. We knew we were going to have some watermelon and, like you mentioned, some Kool-Aid. We knew that whatever day it fell on, that it was going down. We were going to have a long day. It was always hot. Not this kind of heat, but it was always hot, but we knew we would be outside all day, having a great time. So we always prepped and would get excited for Juneteenth. And we just knew it was Juneteenth. I don't even think as a kid, a little kid, I knew it was June 19th. I don't even think I knew that yet. But I just knew it was going to be a great time. And you would meet up with all your friends and go to the parades and go to the picnic. And I like your outfit. I like yours. And everybody just all excited.
Nice. Was there a certain color that you would wear, or was it different every year?
No, it was different every year. It was whatever we found at Wieners. She would just be like, you like that? It was some kind of shorts and a shirt, something simple. We never wore dresses. I was not that type of little girl. So it was going to be some type of shorts and a shirt. Everybody either had on some nice shoes. It's just everybody would, because you knew you would see all your friends. Like, as an African-American girl, like back then in Galveston, there were several neighborhoods or projects. Mine was called Cedar Terrace. And so you knew all the people from all the different neighborhoods would come together. And so you would see your friends from school. It just was a big thing for us. It was always my favorite holiday. Like 4th of July, of course, that's a big national federal holiday. But Juneteenth was our 4th of July. Like, we were having a ball all day, all over Galveston. So I remember that to the T. Like,
I love it. I love it. So what's the significance with red foods? I was reading somewhere that it's symbolic. I don't know.
Well, to me, at the time we didn't know. And then for a long time, I didn't even know that Juneteenth had a flag. And that flag is blue, red, and it has like a bursting white star in the middle. And I promise you, it's probably been a year or so since I knew the meaning of that flag. So red in general, I didn't think it was a thing, and it wasn't taught to me. It wasn't something that my grandmother said, okay, we have, Kool-Aid and we have watermelon for this reason, or red beans and rice. I never knew that was something symbolic to her until maybe a couple of years ago when I noticed the flag. And I know red is usually a sign of resilience, strength and, perseverance. So I took that as, maybe that's why, because I had to think my grandmother, in the 2000s, she was already in her 60s, 70s. She's been through all of these different changes, and her family came to Galveston from Louisiana. So that's almost 6 or 7, well, maybe 7 generations that were born and raised in Galveston. So I'm more than sure somebody, not saying that somebody was directly there, but somebody that knew why we were celebrating this, and it just trickled down.
Okay. So today, do you still go back? Do you go to Galveston for Juneteenth every year?
It's still my favorite. I promise you, I'm 35, but ever since I entered the workforce, since 2010, Juneteenth before it became a federal holiday, that's always been a day I took off. I knew I was taking off June 19th. If it was on the weekend, okay, cool, but I'm taking off either way. I'm not coming to work.
I love it.
That is a day of celebration for me, and they don't have to see me.
So what do you see today? Like, the celebrations, have they changed from when you were a child?
No, I can say, I want to say at one point it did, only because of 2008 when we had Hurricane Ike, a lot of people left the island. So I can say going back after that, it was smaller than it usually would be. Me as a child growing up, the parades weren't as big as they used to be. We had different bands and things of that sort. But I can honestly say now that it's become a federal holiday, you have more people curious. You have more people learning about it. You have more people trying to figure out, okay, so how did we not know this? So you see an influx of people coming back. We still have the same parade. We still have the same community picnic, and it's still in the same location that it's been in since I was a kid. So I see that being the same. But again, that's something that's, trickled down. This year, for the first time for Juneteenth, they're going to actually have a fireworks show. You never really see this fireworks show. You've only seen, in Galveston, this type of fireworks show for the 4th of July. And I honestly, when I saw that, because, I have to stay up on the latest and the greatest for Juneteenth festivities, I was so shocked. I was like, what? We getting a fireworks show? So that's new this year, 2025. So I'm excited about that. So that'll be something that's changed and that's new. But like I said, the parade is still it comes down the same street. The streets has always come down. The community picnic is in the same park that it's been. I've seen more festivals happening. Like, it's not just that one area for the community picnic. but there's like other parks that are having different festivals and things now. So that's
Hmm.
is actually cool to see, you know.
Yeah, Bilala, you mentioned Emancipation Park, which I live
Yes.
Hmm.
not too far from there, and I was at a bookshop on Saturday, and actually I walked by, they were having a Juneteenth, some kind of Juneteenth celebration. Like I didn't want to be too
Yeah.
nosy because they were taking pictures, but they had like this old car and it was decorated with white flowers and everybody was wearing white and yeah, so the celebrations have already started. Yeah,
Oh
and
yeah.
It's an Emancipation Park, and this is very random. So, Emancipation Park, I think, is off Emancipation Avenue,
Hmm.
but they changed that. Like, and when I moved to Houston, that street was known as Chartres or something like that. So, because the Cameroon Catholic Church, St. Nicholas, is off of Clay and Chartres, now Emancipation Avenue. And so it's like one day I'm driving and I know I'm looking for Chartres. So I go past this Emancipation Avenue, like, I've never seen this before.
Hmm.
Getting lost there before I
Right.
realized that they changed the name. But this
The
was actually
name.
even before 2020. And then when I was
Hmm.
researching for this episode, it turns out that freed black people in Houston bought that park in 1865 maybe. They paid $800, so everybody put money together and bought that park, and it has been community owned ever since.
they do a lot of that park, like they have a lot of events like year round, and it's really, yeah, it's very community focused outside of
Hmm.
Juneteenth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know they do have like a big community service or community event where people volunteer for Juneteenth also.
Okay, that's cool.
So,
And that's something. I've never done
okay.
that though. Like just thinking of it, I was just like, I've never even thought about Juneteenth anywhere else. Like just to see other people celebrating it, it's like, oh, okay, I need to check into that because I'm not that far, from Houston, and
Houston.
I would love to see how other people celebrate as well.
Yeah, there's actually also like a Freedmen's Quarter in Houston
Yes,
somewhere. I think it's off of like Memorial around Sabine Promenade somewhere, Buffalo
Mm.
Bayou. There's
Oh,
a Freedman's Town. I saw it on Top Chef of all places.
that's
oh
random.
wow, right?
So, Krishanda, in your view, like, what role does Juneteenth? Obviously, you just said that when you think about Juneteenth, obviously you think about Galveston because that's where you grew up, but that's also
Right.
significant in the history. That's where the soldiers came and like declared 2 years late, that the enslaved people were to be free. So, to you, like, how does Juneteenth tie into the identity of Galveston? Like, is it intertwined or? What's your view?
Well, my view of Juneteenth and its history has actually grown, as I become older and learn more of the history. It's kind of like when you think about it, it's like, okay, Ashton Villa, that's where they read the proclamation and let people know that we were free. And then I'm one of those people that when I'm thinking about something, I'm visualizing it and I'm thinking of, Galveston used to be one of the most wealthiest places, so it was predominantly white. And I can only imagine, these people that have all these slaves and them hearing this. So you can hear the relief. I can see and hear the relief in, the African Americans, but I can also hear and see the frustration in the
Mm-hmm.
Caucasian people.
Mm-hmm.
And Ashton Villa being one of the like big, I want to say one of the, I think in the book it said something like it was the last holdout area in Galveston. So that was somewhere where the Confederate soldiers would be like that, not hang out, but this is somewhere that they would all be. And just to think that that same place, where it had all these people with all this hate in their heart and, oh, you're not changing us. This is where you had to know, yes, you do have to change. Like it's time for y'all to let these people go. And then also just by learning over the years, shout out to Mr. Sam Collins, not my dad, but tied into the family. He's a great historian of Juneteenth. And a lot of those soldiers that went into Galveston to let people know that they were free were Black people.
I
So, and
just read
again,
that today. I didn't
we
know that.
we had to free ourselves. So we had to let everybody know, because when you think 1865, some Black people still couldn't read. Even if you put it in the newspaper, that doesn't mean we saw it, So when I think about it, I'm like, we have been fighting for a long time. That's the kind of stuff I think about, like, we really have been fighting, this fight for equality for forever, literally. And so I really enjoy the fact that I can or may be a part of some of those soldiers that did settle here. When we read the proclamation and these enslaved African Americans are free now, and some people stayed. Like they occupied Warden and Galveston, and then I'm like, okay, I wonder which one was, a part of my family. So that's the kind of stuff I think about too now when I think about Juneteenth and celebrating it. So it's just so much history that I'm still learning about it, and I'm actually grateful that more people are starting to tap into it. Some of those soldiers, you can only imagine what they faced when they got down here.
Right.
That's the kind of stuff that goes through my mind when I think about it. Okay.
I got a question because you said you did not learn about Juneteenth at school. We joke about the fact that there's two Americas, right? There'll be something that happens in the collective Black diaspora space or Black American space, and the other America has no idea. And so seeing that you grew up celebrating Juneteenth, where I would say that it's a big part of Black American life, African American life in Galveston, but yet it was not taught at schools. Did you have friends from school who were curious about it? Did you talk to your friends? Were they open to learn and maybe join the celebrations?
Well, honestly, I can't say that I did. The friends that I did talk to about it knew about it, because they were the ones that looked like me. So we were already celebrating it anyway. And then, like I said, it was also in the summer. Your other friends from school that may be of other race, we didn't see them in the summer, So I honestly feel like with it being something that wasn't taught in school, you had to learn about it at home. And I'm more than sure their parents wasn't teaching them about it at home, and I mean, I didn't go back to school and ask them either. So, but I did not see them at the community picnics. I did not see them at the parades. So I can't say it was like that for all, but I can honestly say for most, it was like that. Because even in high school, I don't remember talking, and it's not, and I'm going to say it. So Galveston, honestly, growing up, we were divided, like Galveston was kind of segregated on accident, but on purpose. All of the projects were kind of in the centralized area of the island. So from, I want to say, it was, four? It was called Magnolia Homes, Cedar Terrace, Oleander Homes, Parkland, and Palm Terrace. So 5. And maybe from 18th Street down to 3rd Street. But we were on, what side of the island is that? We were on the Harborside port area of the island. So most of my friends that were not, African American, they didn't live on that side of town. So, and the parades and everything was held on that side of town. So I don't see them coming in that side of town anyway to come to a parade.
Wow. I don't know. Do they teach it? Do they teach about Juneteenth now in public school? I have no idea.
Still
They
no,
probably
'cause I asked
wouldn't
my
teach
son.
in Texas. Yeah,
They're
they
not.
probably would not teach.
This is Texas. They are
Texas
not.
would not. Because Texas has the history textbooks where they say it was indentured servitude.
But we can talk about the Civil War. We can talk about the Civil War and the Union and Confederate, soldiers, but we can't tell you about the work that each individual, like what the Union, workers were doing. Well, they'll say they were trying to go to free slaves. They can tell you that part. But getting into it, they don't. And that's why it's very important that I share that with my son as well, because he's not going to get that in school, and he's 15 now. So, he still has friends that are Black African American who ask him, what is Juneteenth? So we're not doing a great job with teaching it, so.
That's so crazy because, it became a federal holiday in 2021, right? And so I don't know. In 2020, we know that there were, the protests nationwide. There was this kind of collective conversation, discussion happening about race. And then, the bill was put forward and Biden signed it in 2021 to make Juneteenth a federal holiday, which, by the way, I think 3 Texas representatives voted against.
I saw that.
Our state, I don't know what's wrong with us.
It's never been right. It's never been right.
Something's
I don't even know why I'm still here.
Seriously.
It's really crazy.
Yeah. So, I mean, along with, 2020, 2021, we had this, wave of, I would call it performative actions that
Mm-hmm.
a lot of corporations were taking, which they're walking back now. That,
All the way back. All the way
yeah,
back.
and that's how we know that it was so performative. But now I'm questioning. It's a federal holiday. They're still not teaching it in school. In fact, they want to, take more history out of the schools.
Exactly.
So have we actually progressed, like, as a nation in terms of, like, this discussion, awareness, the people who need to learn, are they actually learning?
Honestly, that's the thing though, is are they actually learning? Because even for me, being a Galvestonian, it was a lot I did not know. And it was a lot I would not have known unless, until that curiosity sparked in me. So had I not done that, or I kind of just would have let it be just Juneteenth, it's a parade tomorrow, type deal, and that history would have been lost too.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we see America doing, backtracking on a lot of things. They didn't feel like that was important from jump. So even now that everybody's backtracking and we all need to be together, DEI, Nas, no, we don't need that. It's almost like us celebrating us is always offensive to somebody that's not, Black. Yes, they're backtracking on all this, but I feel like it's also another fight that we're gonna have to face alone. Not really even alone, because we do have some allies. We do have some people that are just as curious and want to know, but we have to give people a guide, like, of how to go find this information, how to research this information. Because even if you don't go to Galveston to celebrate it, somebody should know, or anywhere, there should be something going on everywhere, I feel like. Because anywhere, any city, any state you go to for the 4th of July, there's a big Independence Day, this or that.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I feel about Juneteenth. I should never be out of town on Juneteenth and nothing's happening, so, and that's just me personally.
Yeah, agree. And it's a federal holiday, so nobody has any excuse.
Exactly.
You have, even if you don't know, it's like, okay, let me find out why I'm getting this day off work.
Mm-hmm.
Let me not just take the day
Oh,
off and
they're gonna take it off.
like do a little bit of reading. Damn.
Yeah. And that's the thing though, because we still get a lot of people that's like, what's Juneteenth? Because you got to think about it too. With it becoming a federal holiday, became a federal holiday in 2021. It still was overshadowed by COVID that was happening in 2020. So people still worrying about COVID, who's going to be the next president. We got these people acting a fool in America. So it kind of still got overshadowed by all this drama. So again, even though they made it a federal holiday, all of that stuff dwindled away again.
Yeah, I agree. And I honestly, like, I see where your dad was coming from, right? I'm not saying that of course it should be a celebration, but
Correct.
There's also a conversation that has to be happening at the same time as a celebration. Like, okay, let's talk about why it took 2 years, and until present day America, I feel like we've regressed.
Oh, we have definitely regressed. Definitely. And it's really, ties into my dad's frustration again, because we got the word 2 years late. Then we got the federal holiday many years later. And now it's still kind of like, you feel like now, even in corporate America, like when you mention it, what's Juneteenth and why are y'all taking it off? Why is it so important to you? Why wouldn't it be? Do you see this melanin? That's important to me, and I want to go home. I'm going to Gal. So I'll see y'all next time. And nobody ever understood that, because I want to say my first job as an adult, when I entered the workforce, Juneteenth was a alternate holiday, and you only got it if it fell on a weekday, and like nobody really paid attention to it. We had everybody was still using paper. Everything wasn't on line. So it was a printout, and it was at the bottom, and it literally said alternate holidays. And it wasn't just Juneteenth, it was other cultures specific holidays too, but they were alternate because they weren't federal holidays at that time. But they did allow us to take time if you wanted to on that day. So I just feel like now, okay, it's a federal holiday and everybody gets it, but they don't get it. They just, I'm gonna take off.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. I can see that. Some people just enjoy the day off without being curious enough to ask why or what this day is about.
Correct.
Yeah. So A lot of our audience members are, African immigrants like us. So
Mm-hmm.
we definitely want to stress that, it's important for us as African immigrants who come to America to learn the
Right.
history of African Americans or Black Americans. And Juneteenth, obviously is very
Mm-hmm.
significant. So what would you suggest, for somebody who wants to learn more, to celebrate authentically and respectfully? Like what
Right.
would you say to somebody who is not, born and raised in America? Or maybe even if they are and they just don't know about it.
Right. Honestly, the first thing is the curiosity. Like, that's not disrespectful at all. Not knowing is not disrespectful at all because one, I don't feel like it was intended for everybody to even know. So I've found many books, even one that I saw, and I only read a synopsis of it maybe a year ago. And it was called Island of Color, where Juneteenth started. And literally it talks about those Union soldiers, it talks about the Black community in Galveston at the time, what people were doing before, during, after. I believe there's another book, and I cannot think of the name right now, but literally it's letters from one of the Union soldiers in his journey down to Galveston, well, to the county, or I think he wasn't specifically in Galveston County, but somewhere near, and came in for the Emancipation Proclamation. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of information I'm still finding. There's still a lot of things about Galveston in general that I'm still learning. And I feel like now we have no excuse to not know. Like at this point, if I want to know, I have to go find it. It's not being presented. No, I can't watch a documentary on Netflix, even though, I really like to watch videos. So, but even on YouTube, there's a lot of people that's doing like what we're doing now. We're just sharing information, to spark some curiosity in other people to go learn or to go find out and see what we can bring together as a collective, because we have to teach our kids. It's not something they're going to learn in school.
You know what? When you said Netflix, why have they not made like a Juneteenth like themed? Ryan Coogler, I know you're probably not listening to this podcast.
Yes, and I want to be on it. Like, put me on.
Hello.
I want to be on put me on the documentary. I mean,
not only Ryan Coogler, as a card carrying member of the Beehive, Miss Tina is from Galveston and she talks about it a lot. So hey,
yes,
maybe this is a project
those roots are there too.
To get more people to learn about Galveston, because
Yes.
it has a very rich history, and
Yes.
I think Galveston gets lost in the Houston bubble.
We do.
Yes.
We do. Because even our celebrities, we do. Like, even our celebrities, I'm like, a lot of people didn't know Barry White was from Galveston. On Martin, Brother Man from the Fifth Flow is from Galveston. Like, I mean, it's just so many people that are there. But when they go into Hollywood spaces and things, the first thing they say is Houston, because that's the relatable piece. You have a lot of NFL players, basketball, they're from Galveston. But you just might not know. Beyonce still have a lot of cousins in Galveston. She has a lot of family that's still there. Miss Tina just sold her house that she had on the beach in Galveston, And I just feel like, it's just a lot of history for us there, because even, other southern states, Louisiana, Mississippi, a lot of those people came over to Galveston. I don't know what brought them there, and that's something I'm still like curious to know. What made these people, because it's still a southern state. So I want to know what made them relocate to Galveston. I really do.
I'm actually curious. I was thinking about that when we were talking, because I know Mississippi and Louisiana had plantations, but
Correct.
I was wondering, like, what were enslaved people in Galveston, like, what kind of work
Yes,
were they doing?
Exactly. And that's something I'm currently interested in, because like I said, my great grandparents, they came to Galveston from Louisiana. So it's like, why? Like, to me, it still was a southern, predominantly white town. I feel like they would still go through the same thing they went here. So I was just curious to know that. And that's the sad part, is questions we should have asked when they were here, and now they're gone, and now we have to go find out for ourselves.
Yeah, I hear that. Yeah, I'm definitely going to be doing, a lot more reading.
Yeah.
Yes.
About,
there are things that stare us in the face and we don't even realize. So I lived in Sugarland for a while.
Mm.
and 18, they were building something and they happened to dig up several skeletons. And it turns out
Yes.
that it was the skeletons of formerly enslaved peoples. And
Mm-hmm.
so I asked, but what were they doing there? Like, where did they come from? And somebody said,
Mm-hmm.
Sugarland. I
Yes.
said,
Mm-hmm.
"Ooh,
Mm-hmm.
ooh, sugar
Right. No,
plank."
but that's
It
the
never,
same thing for all of us.
it never crossed my mind that Sugarland literally was sugar plantations. And I mean, the old
Yeah.
sugar mill is still standing there, but
Yes.
those dots did not connect until this thing happened. And then there was such a hoopla about what to do, where they
Mm-hmm.
ended up giving them a proper burial. And maybe trying to identify them in some way, but at least just not letting them be in this unmarked
Mm-hmm.
land somewhere and
Mm-hmm.
giving them something that was befitting. But that was the first time, and I had been in Houston for almost 10 years at that point, had lived in Sugarland, and had
Mm-hmm.
never considered where the name came from. Or Sienna
Right.
Plantation. The fact that
Mm-hmm.
it,
I used
That's
to
why
live
I
in
can.
Siena. I used to live in
No.
Siena.
I told a friend not to buy there because of that name. I'm like, do you better not buy a
They
house there.
dropped.
You
They dropped the plantation though. They dropped
They
it
should have
in
never. The
12.
fact that they thought about it, the fact that you
Hello.
thought about it and put plantation on that name was a slap in the face, and I would have never bought a house.
Even
Lord,
in
look,
is it Richmond or Rosenberg? There's one of those places that I drive by once in a while, and I see there
Mhm.
are places that have plantation like
yeah,
boldly written on
yeah,
the property
in
gates.
Richmond. Yeah, Richmond
Yeah.
has a couple that I can think of.
I'm just not with it.
You just said that. You know, they also have the plantation shutters. I don't know if they've changed the name.
Oh, there's I know there were those wooden window shutters.
Yeah, and they're like the
What?
plantation shutters are like
Yeah,
the ones they can open. So they're like attached, but you can like open them.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. I'm like, because in 2020 we lost the master bedroom. But a lot of these things are just performative, right? Like we've talked about, it doesn't change them. But I feel like they're words that we use. Oh, I never thought about a master
Mhm.
bedroom. It had never
Mhm.
crossed my mind
Mhm.
until when people make a fuss. It's like, I think that is worth talking about, but I think changing the name. I agree, changing Sienna Plantation, definitely.
Yeah.
Right.
But
Yeah.
master bedroom, plantation shutters, like, okay.
Right.
We know
We're
where
just
it
not
comes
thinking
from,
of
but
it. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, because that was one of those things my father taught me as well.
yeah.
Was the master bedroom situation. And it was like, okay, what I'm supposed to call it, the big room? Like, I was trying to figure it out. I'm telling y'all, this man, one thing I can say is that I love my dad for being the person that sparked a lot of questions in my head. Because sometimes, when you ask your parents stuff, you kind of feel like you're talking back, but I really didn't want to know. So I was kind of like, let me let him make it. He said, don't call it master bedroom. I mean, he was like, do you know where they come from? I'm telling you, he was just that type of guy.
Nice. I love that though. And this is just kind of a tangent, but as we're talking, I thought of that plantation that just burned down in Louisiana.
Mm-hmm.
How do you like this? This just shows how unserious and just like disrespectful America is. Because
Mhm.
how could you have that as a wedding venue? Why are you getting married on a
People were
plantation?
getting married there. You know how much money that plantation made?
because the Daughters of the Confederacy did a good job in the rebrand and PR machine and
Oh, for sure.
promoted antebellum culture, and they're people who romanticize that period
Yes.
of time.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
It
they do.
does. It does, and you got to think about it. When you're being taught, it's almost like the pretty ugly thing. You know how they say back in the day, they used to make you feel like if you were dark skinned, you weren't cute. It's almost like they switched it. It's like it makes you feel like you want this life. You see this beautiful, this acres of land, and it's pretty, and I want to get married there. Not thinking of the history of it, so you just kind of like, and nobody taught you either. And I feel like it's a lot of that goes on, and we just be looking like, oh, I want that. And then it's like, no, think about it. They're getting us again.
That's crazy.
So,
Yeah.
mhm.
And when it burned down, like I went to the Google reviews because,
Mhm.
it was a resort apparently. And I was just mind blown because people were literally leaving reviews like they would leave it for a regular resort. Like the food was so nice. We loved the service. I'm like, do you guys how do you just
They
go
don't
to
know.
that kind of site? And when the first time I went to New Orleans, like it was probably 10 years ago now, I did, I think it's Laura Plantation. Like I did a tour and honestly, I learned a lot, but I regretted it. But when I got to the plantation, there's a certain energy, like I don't know, maybe it was in my head, but you can feel. So I'm like, how would you even have a wedding here on this kind of place when so many horrendous things happened to people here? Like, how are you, like
how
coming
you
to
don't
have
feel
lunch?
that. Yeah. How you don't feel that. I don't even go to stuff like that, honestly, because I'm always triggered.
Mhm.
I'll never forget, even like I told you about Ashton Villa being a place where they read the proclamation. And I honestly remember going there as in middle school. We went to Galveston's historical homes. And just like you say, you felt a weird or eerie feeling when you went there. That's how I always felt going into historical homes in Galveston. To this day, going into the Moody Mansion, going into Ashton Villa, I always have this creepy feeling because, like, yeah, these were rich families and they had these beautiful historical homes, but it's almost like you already know you're not welcome. It's like you feel you're not welcome, even though, we were freed or whatever. I just always felt that in those type of spaces. So I can't really go to plantations. As many times I've been down to New Orleans and Louisiana and everything, I cannot do it. I already know I'll probably be overwhelmed.
Yeah. I mean, I regretted, like I said, I regretted the tree that I didn't know. And I think they did, that particular plantation, they did do a good job of like, talking about the descendants of the enslaved people. Like they had records of the people who were alive, at that time. But still, it's just like, I felt really weird being there and just like paying to kind of, and I'm like, who is this money going to? It's not going to the descendants of the enslaved people. So then as much education as you're giving, you're not really doing justice.
Yes. It just reminded me, the one that burned down, there was a clip of a lady who was giving a tour and she was talking about how they did not separate the kids, or families were not broken up or something, and tried to play it off like that was a good thing. Like we did mamas. Great. What about this thing was good? What?
They had to watch their biological parents be beat and slave and work and child, look, that'll be a whole nother topic for, I'm telling you.
Anyway. Well, Creshonda, thank you so much for joining us, sharing your knowledge, your family history and traditions. And, for our audience, like we said, go do your reading. If you have the day off work on Juneteenth, use it, to honor the history of Galveston and of the enslaved people, in America. I don't know that they'll be doing fireworks anywhere outside of Galveston, but
yeah. But if you
guys
are available, come see.
I also want to say, for African immigrants, if you're at work and they're looking for volunteers for Juneteenth, please try to cede the floor to somebody who has more connections and ties to the holiday, unless you've read up about it and you've done a lot of research. But if you have no idea, please don't take up space for something that is not yours.
Exactly. Because, we were mentioning on a previous recording, to certain people, all Black people, we're all the same in their eyes, but you should be self-aware to know that, this is not a space for me.
Right. And not only that, just be curious. Come see, what's going on. We are all cohabitating in this space. Let's go, let's find out. Just like I want to be curious about other people's cultures and know what they know and celebrate what they celebrate. I want them to be just as curious about me. I'm simple, but it's a few things. I got a couple cool things going on.
Awesome. Well, happy Juneteenth to our listeners, and happy Juneteenth to you, Creshonda. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you.
We have a special guest with us today to talk about the history of Juneteenth, her own personal connection to Juneteenth, and the history of Juneteenth in Galveston, Texas. So welcome, Miss Angela Taylor, and thank you so much for being our guest for this special episode.
Thank you for inviting me.
And just a quick intro, Miss Angela was born and raised on Galveston Island, and she's a proud graduate of Ball High School, class of 1989, and 2019 graduate of University of Houston, Clear Lake. I am also an alumni of UHCL, so go Hawks. Yeah. And she currently serves as the e-branch specialist and marketing coordinator for Coastal Community Federal Credit Union. She is an avid sports fan. She supports LeBron. So you support LeBron, whatever team he's on?
Whatever team he's on.
You follow him? Okay.
Yes. I have shirts from all three teams. Yes,
Nice.
jersey. So Cleveland, Miami, and the Lakers. I have everything from wherever he has been. Yes, ma'am.
I love it. And she's also a fan of her Ball High School tours.
That's
She
right.
enjoys singing at her church, as well as being a part of the Houston Mass Choir. Miss Angela is very active in her community. She has served on numerous boards in Galveston County and currently serves as a board member of Hitchcock ISD Education Foundation and serving as the president of Galveston Public Schools Hall of Honor Committee, and is the 2025 leader of Texas City Lamarck Chambers Leadership Mainland Program. You're so busy.
I am.
I love it. And Miss Angela has 2 sons, Joshua and Denzel, and 10 grandchildren, as
Yes.
well as 1 dog named RJ.
Yes, RJ.
Well, once again, welcome, Miss Angela. And we want to start with asking you about your own family Juneteenth tradition. So tell us about your earliest memories of your family celebrating Juneteenth.
You know, one of the earliest things that I remember growing up in Galveston had to be like around 8 or 9. And back then, in those times, the community, the Black community, we would congregate at Kempner Park. Kempner Park is named after one of the rich white families that migrated to Galveston and, you know, are very influential in Galveston. So Kempner Park is right behind. It's like a mansion on 29th Street. Kempners used to live in. And so behind that was the Kempner Park. And so we would meet up there and it would just be a fun time, you know, music, food, you know, it was kind of like one big family reunion per se for the city of Galveston, because at that time, you know, in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, you didn't have, not too many people, as far as we knew, were celebrating Juneteenth. You know, not to the extent that we were, you know, because it was still something that we held dear to us. And so, of course, we celebrated it every year it came around. So, you know, you would have your DJs out there, you know, playing music and, you know, it'll be, like I said, a lot of food and, you know, and it just seemed like everybody was there. You know, anybody who was anybody was there at Kempner Park. And so, you know, as far as things that my family per se would pass down, I wouldn't say we had like quote unquote tradition, but it was a must that every year we did celebrate Juneteenth to some extent. And for the most part, back then, it was pretty much a community thing where it was understood that we were going to go to wherever the community event was, whatever it was, we were going to go and have a good time and stuff of that nature.
So do you remember how old you were when you actually came into the understanding of what the holiday signified?
Well, of course, you know, growing up in Galveston, like fully understood what Juneteenth was, I had to be probably like in the 8th grade. So, you know, it's like 14 years old. Of course, I knew that, you know, we were free. You know, of course, that's what was, you know, the sentiment of Juneteenth was. But it wasn't until like I was in the 8th grade where I started kind of learning more of the backstory of, you know, of what Juneteenth was, you know, when I started learning about General Gordon Granger and, you know, the Emancipation Proclamation and, you know, why did it take so long for us in Texas to get it? And so I started, you know, probably like 8th grade, kind of putting pieces together, you know, like, okay, Juneteenth isn't just about us being out there having fun, you know, eating food and stuff of that nature. It started getting to the point where, hey, why isn't Juneteenth in my history book? You know, so that's probably when I started realizing more of the importance of Juneteenth.
And Bilala had asked this question to our last guest, so I want to ask it to you as well. Your classmates, right? Like when you said, because you said you were not taught about Juneteenth at school, but of course you had this, you know, tradition where you would celebrate with the community. So your white classmates, or maybe even other Black classmates who didn't celebrate, like, are you aware of any knowledge that they had about this history?
Well, one thing I could say about Galveston, and it's something that I'm kind of proud of, is particularly with my class of '89. Like when we all were in the eighth grade, it was Central Middle School. And so we only have one public high school, which is Ball High School. And so before you went to Ball High School, all the eighth graders went to Central Middle School together. That was all that was there. And so one of the good things about Galveston, and still to this day, is the diversity that is on the island. We have ethnicities of every race, culture, and like I said, in particular with my class, with Juneteenth being in the summertime, you understand what I'm saying? It wasn't discussed as much, of course, during school time. However, a lot of my classmates did know, what Juneteenth was and the significance of what Juneteenth is about. And so, even like today, if you were to come to Galveston and embark on some of the Juneteenth festivities, you would see a rainbow coalition, per se, of people, and particularly people who are born on the island or not. And now, with it being a national holiday, we get people coming from all over now to come to Galveston to learn about Juneteenth. And so, I would say, I'm kind of proud of that fact that the people who I grew up with, they knew what Juneteenth was about. They might not have celebrated it like it's celebrated now, but they knew about it. And, for me particularly, they were kind of just as proud as we were, I would say, that Juneteenth was founded in Galveston.
That's awesome. Okay, I'm glad to hear that. Do you have a favorite memory of a Juneteenth celebration or parade or one in particular that stands out?
Outside of, like when we were younger, like I said, Kempner Park was the place to be. But I would say probably my favorite one was when Juneteenth turned 150. And I was, of course, an adult. But with my connection to, I was a journalist for a long time at the Galveston County Daily News. And so it was kind of like my sword to die on. Every year around Juneteenth time, I made sure I had an editorial in the paper about supporting Juneteenth and making it a national holiday. And so when the 150th came around, it was just so many activities to do and so many events at that time. I'm heavily involved with a lot of the events that go on in Galveston. And so one of the things that I enjoy the most is I'm currently like the MC, the Mistress of Ceremonies per se, for the Juneteenth Scholarship Gala that is put on by the Juneteenth Development Incorporated, led by Joyce Brown, who's been doing it. I want to say it was year, but not I haven't been doing it time, but I started out as a judge then. Judge, where local young ladies in high school, 16 and up, uh, compete for a scholarship. But whoever wins is considered the Juneteenth Queen Ambassador. And so they get to be, like in a parade and, all that kind of stuff and represent the county, at various Juneteenth events. And so, I can't really pinpoint one particular one because each one of them to me is a special one. It's like every year it gets bigger, it gets better, because at one point it did kind of fall off where not too many people, especially back when Galveston had like a gang issue in our Black community. And so, you know, um, you had to kind of meander and maneuver around those things and to make sure but the parade was always something that everyone looked forward to. All of them to me are special, and it has its own little bit that, like I said, every year it increase. You have your emancipation breakfast, and I want to say like the last time Al Edwards, who was a state representative for the state of Texas out of Houston, he was the one who sponsored the Juneteenth bill way back late 70s, early 80s for Juneteenth to become a state holiday. And so he would come down to Galveston all the time, and he would be so passionate about Juneteenth and the history and the makeup. And he recognized that Galveston was the birthplace. Galveston was where Juneteenth should be celebrated and recognized as having that history of being, you know what I'm saying, there. And so anytime I got to spend with him before he passed away was, some of the highlights of my Juneteenth celebrations. I've had opportunities to sing at some of the galas and, at the emancipation breakfast that we have. And, so I don't want to particularly point out one, but for me, it was probably like all of them, because every year it's like you get to do something else. And now, with it being a national holiday, one of the things that I'm so happy about is that finally the city of Galveston is getting on board. With, the park board now has set aside monies to help promote Juneteenth and give these organizations and people who want to do Juneteenth related things, they're now able to because they have the funding to do so. So yeah, now it's just all kind of Juneteenth stuff, and like it's no way that I can even go to all of them. There's so many now.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, with it being a national holiday, right? And like you said, now, the city is taking it more seriously in terms of funding. Do you see the younger generation having the same passion that you think you and others had back in the day?
Well, I mean, I'm not that old, even though I'm 50.
I didn't mean to imply it like that.
I know you didn't, but I just clear that. As far as the younger generation, I could say Gen Z.
Mhm.
I do think that, for the most part, they do recognize that Juneteenth is something that needs to, like I know y'all seen 4th of July was not my Emancipation Day. I wasn't free on the 4th of July, but I was free on Juneteenth. And so, of course, now with social media and Instagram and catchy phrases and hashtags and this, that, and the other, I do see that part where it's an effort. But as far as the behind the scenes and organizing and I still think it's a ways to go, with the younger generation because, of course they feel that, oh, okay, the older generation is doing it, or, I'm just gonna go to where I think it's the most fun. And that's why I said now it's all kind of events all across Galveston County now. So like for instance, in Texas City does this poetry slam every year, the Juneteenth poetry slam, where it's like people who do spoken word and stuff of that nature, they go and they speak at this thing, but every year it's a theme. So like this year, I think it's Kentucky Derby theme. Where you dress up, the people will be dressed up in Kentucky Derby gear. One year was Met Gala, where you put on, so every year is a different thing. So more young people like those sorts of things, like Juneteenth paint and sip events, all these different things. So I do think that they're getting more involved in it in those arenas as far as, something fun to do. But what I really wish is that, again, that they get on board with some of the organizations or, partner with the older generation or the people who are established, who have things that have been going on for years, to come in and do their input because everything can be improved. You know what I'm saying? It's going to take all of us to help propel Juneteenth to something bigger and grand on the scale of 4th of July. You know what I'm saying? Juneteenth is just as important as the 4th of July. And so, of course, some people were upset last year because of the commercialization of Juneteenth. I heard that a lot or saw it on, social media. And I'm like, y'all, what do y'all want them to do now? If they didn't do it, then they'd be like, well, y'all don't do that on Juneteenth. You know, Come on now. Yes, they're gonna have the plates and the napkins and the cups and the streamers and all this here because it's a national holiday now. You see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So instead of us being, begrudgingly like, oh, well, what do you want us to do? You want them to do that because we want people, more and more people, to know the history and why the significance of Juneteenth is important. So yeah, with the younger generation, they are, some of them do stuff, and especially in, from Galveston. Being from Galveston, we wear, our city on our sleeves, and we're proud of Galveston. And, wherever I go, like I know some people, like, how some athletes or, like actors or whomever, famous people, they're from Galveston, but they'll say they're from Houston
Mhm.
because people don't know what Galveston is. But I don't care where I'm at. I'm from Galveston, about 40 minutes away from Houston. I let you know because that's what a lot of people who I know, we represent our hometown. And so, to that end, Juneteenth is one of those things that we're proud of. We're the birthplace where it all began is in Galveston. So, for the most part, the younger people who I'm associated with and who I know, and I know a lot of them, they, want to celebrate Juneteenth. And hopefully, they'll get a chance to start, building and doing their own things to help, celebrate it.
I agree with you about the commercialization, Bilal. I don't know how you feel. I think it's a good thing because it's a sign that it's mainstream,
Right,
right? Yeah.
right.
I
What do
mean,
you think?
I agree with that, but I think there's a little bit more learning because just this afternoon I was scrolling on a platform. I usually buy like fonts and things for like my crafts, and there was like they were selling a bunch of like graphics to make shirts for Juneteenth,
Mhm.
but I think that is important to learn. Like, for instance, a lot of people don't know that there's a Juneteenth flag, which is not in the colors that people go to. It's not red,
Black
green.
and green.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
red, white, and blue.
It's red, white, and blue. And so it's just, even if we're going to commercialize it and make it more, I just want people to do just a little bit more and learn and not conflate the two.
I agree with you with that. Do your due diligence. The red, black, and green is mostly reserved for Black History Month.
Yeah.
And the red, white, and that's why I say, Juneteenth is just as relevant as the 4th of July. The flag, like you said, a lot of people don't know that. The flag is red, white, and blue. The colors are red, white, and blue. Yes, we can still pay homage to our motherland and this, that, and the other with those colors, but you're absolutely correct, B. I agree with you on that. We do have to do a better job of educating people and not just be like, oh, June 19th, Juneteenth. It's, you just have, your foods, your red soda and watermelon and stuff like that. That's not what it's about. So I agree with you on that.
So you talked about, I think you mentioned General Gordon Granger,
Hmm.
and you, in our email correspondence, you mentioned the fact that people talk about him when they talk about Juneteenth, but he was actually with Black soldiers who came and enforced, right, the proclamation, and the Black soldiers, are kind of overlooked
Hmm.
in the retelling of that story. So can you just talk a little bit about the importance of those soldiers in the history of Juneteenth?
One of my best friends is Sam Collins III, and I'm sure you probably have heard of him. We call him Mr. Juneteenth around here. We're the same age, same class, but he graduated from Hitchcock, and I'm from Ball High. And so, anywho, I didn't even know all this, but like I said, every year I learned something new or something different. And so, a few years ago, because he'll tell me, he'd be like, it was the Black Union soldiers who came and enforced the, General Order Number 3. Even though Granger was the general who led, but it was the Black Union soldiers who took over and were encamped here on the island. And they were the ones who helped to enforce, the law of the land the way that it was going to be. You know what I'm saying? And for it to take 2 years to get almost 2.5 years to get to Texas. You see what I'm saying? A lot of people don't mention the Black Union soldiers. And so to that end, a lot now the narrative in recent Juneteenth celebrations, they have people who come and talk about the full history of the Black Union soldiers. Of course, I don't profess to be a historian, but I do know that because it's all different kind of intricacies that are with that story. But they were the ones, and we have a mural that's on the side on the corner of 3rd, 22nd and Strand in Galveston, where they actually sold slaves on a strand, which was the marketplace. And yeah, right
Wow,
across
I didn't know that about the Strand. Wow.
Yeah, I did not know that.
the strand across, it was the Osterman building, if I'm not, I'm mistaken. But on that corner, there's a marker there, a Juneteenth marker now. And that's where the slaves would come there and at the custom house. But on that corner, that particular area of the strand, that's where slaves, because they would come off the boat at the Galveston Bay, come off the boat, and they would come there and they would be sold. You see what I'm saying right there? So we have a mural that came a few years ago, the year that Juneteenth became a national holiday. It was unveiled. It's called Absolute Equality. And it's a beautiful mural where it shows like the progression from slavery, to modern day African Americans and their contribution to this country. Because in the order, General Order number 3, in it are the words absolute equality, blah, 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 blah. It's a long stuff. Like I said, I'm not, now Sam can quote it off the top of his head, but that's why it was called absolute equality. And, but when you think about it, are we truly being represent, with the absolute equality? But those words were specifically put into that order. Do you understand? And so if you ever get a chance, have y'all came to Galveston before?
Yeah, but not since that mural has been put up, and I was looking at a picture of it online.
Right. And so you see how it starts with slavery and then it goes progression on through and stuff of that nature. And so when that happened, that was like a big deal. I mean, it was people from everywhere who came in. So now when you go on the Strand and you see this huge mural on the side of that building, it just really gives you goosebumps because it kind of, and then of course you have people, we get millions of visitors to Galveston annually. And so of course the Strand is one of the hot spots on the island. So of course when people come, the tourists who come, they're like, wow, what is this? And so they have the opportunity to go into the building where that is the Neo Cultural Center is right there. And it's kind of like a quasi Juneteenth museum per se. It's not an official, but it's what we have for right now. And so you can go in there, and on any given day, Sam might be in there and he'll tell you all about Juneteenth and, the significance of the Black Union soldiers and their part in General Order number 3. So it wasn't just all about General Gordon Granger, but that's what we were taught. You see what I'm saying? It's always, General Gordon Granger. General Gordon Granger, he was the one who came and saved the slaves. And, but we weren't never taught that it was Black Union soldiers who were with him. We just assumed that it was white soldiers, but it was Black soldiers. So how, can you imagine our ancestors, forefathers, those people who were there in 1865? Can you imagine them seeing, these Black troops marching to Galveston and not only bring good news, but they were there to enforce the law of the land? Can you imagine it? Your people are here and, they come with this man to say, y'all are free now. You free. And so that's something that, has to be told in the Juneteenth story. It just has to. So, yeah.
Agreed. An idea, I don't know if this is a misconception or if it's actually true, but there's this idea that when, Granger came with the Black soldiers and they kind of said, hey, you're free since January 1, 1863, this proclamation was made. There's this idea that the enslaved Black people didn't know that already before. Is that true?
Pretty much. Yes. Like I said, I did work for the Galveston County Daily News, and which is Texas's oldest newspaper. Okay. And so, records in the historical paper, show like a little article. Because remember, back then, papers were just on one piece of paper on the front, and it was like little blocks of news, that went through. And it basically talked about Juneteenth and how the people celebrated, um, the news that they were free. Back then, of course, you didn't have telephones. You didn't have Paul Revere riding on his horse early and coming up there and said, because you have to remember, Galveston was, Texas was part of the Confederacy. So, I'm sure the white people probably knew.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
But as far as, now it could have been, the black slaves who were probably in the house, probably heard master talking about, Abraham Lincoln did the Emancipation Proclamation, but of course back then, they probably was like, you better not say nothing,
Right.
and because I'm gonna need you to be out there doing, what you need to be doing. So of course, that's why I said the significance of the black troops to come in, and be the ones to say, "Boo, y'all free." You know what I'm saying? Me personally, I don't think that the majority of them knew, because
Mm-hmm.
of course Galveston was in back then was the mecca of tech. Everything came through Galveston, the port.
Right.
And everything, was, Galveston. That's why Galveston has a lot of firsts, because everything came through Galveston. So, you pull up to shore, you're right there in Galveston. We got the word first there, and then it spread. You see what I'm saying? To the other ones. You see what I'm saying? Yeah, I really, I don't think um they knew beforehand. And if they did, I would say it was probably like a handful who did, because,
Mm-hmm.
we've heard the terminology of the house slave and the field slave. And so I'm more than certain that the ones who were in the house heard some things, but of course, they kept it amongst themselves. They wouldn't dare, what I'm saying, say, oh, y'all know we free. Where you heard that from? Master didn't say, you know what I'm saying? Because unfortunately, we still, some of us still have that mentality, where they think that they can't move in that power of who you are. You understand what I'm saying? Some of us still have that mentality. They won't do uh but they have the power and the ability, that absolute equality to do.
So you were quoted in a National Geographic article that I was reading when I was researching for this episode, because you were the first Black community news editor of the Galveston County Daily News. And they talk about how, obviously prior to Juneteenth becoming a national holiday, you have been advocating for that. So can you tell us how you felt like when in 2021 when Biden finally signed the bill to make it a national holiday?
Yeah. Like I told you, I was at the Daily News, and I was the first Black African American community news editor. I was the first Black to be on the editorial board, first and only,
Wow.
because they don't have any African Americans there anymore as far as on the editorial staff. So for years, before I even got on the editorial board, my former boss, when I first got there, was Heber Taylor, no relation. And he was the best boss I ever had. And he encouraged me, because he knew how passionate I was about Juneteenth and about my hometown. And so I just started writing, every year over and over, hey, Juneteenth needs to be a national holiday. And we weren't even advocating for it to be a national holiday where it's a paid day off. We were just advocating for it to be like a day of observance, like Flag Day or something like that, for the national calendar. And so when it finally became law, across the land, that Juneteenth was becoming a national, I cried. I did. I cried. The same way I did when Barack Obama became president. It was like, these things are happening, and it's because, if you keep advocating, keep writing, keep doing it until something happens, because eventually change is going to come. yeah, we hear that again as a hashtag, or you hear the song, Sam Cooke song, and you want to you just like, Lord, when is it gonna happen for us? It's been 100 and whatever odd years it was at that time. When is it gonna happen where America realizes that we are intricately woven into the fabric of this country? You can't cut out Black history. You can't cut out the fact that those things did happen. And you can't expect for us not to talk about it. You know what I'm saying? Where they tell us, just get over it. Slavery is over. Well, it wasn't me. It was, but you don't realize that you benefited from, that privilege of being of the other race, and so we were so far behind, and we have to realize, y'all, we only been it's 160 years this year. You see what I'm saying? And then even after that, we had to deal with Jim Crow, deal with all these things. You know what I'm saying? And we still fighting. Still. In this country. So I was just elated. I was over the moon, and I only thing that I kind of didn't like was how they assumed that it was just one person who advocated for Juneteenth for everybody around the world and stuff like that. Oh, no, no. In Galveston,
Mm.
people have been fighting for recognition of Juneteenth for decades. Decades. And like you said, we talked about earlier, the commercialization of Juneteenth. And I think people wanted to put a face to Juneteenth. Well, this person is the cheerleader for it, but they weren't the only one. You know what
Right.
I'm saying? And I really wish that it would have been more people from Galveston there to witness that signing. I do know of two people who were there. The two members of the Thomas family was there at the signing, but that was because of their relationship with someone who was from Galveston County who was on the communication staff at the White House. And so they were able to be there, but they weren't, celebrated like the other
Yeah.
person. You see what I'm saying? And so that was the only thing that kind of disturbed me when it did go into effect. And like, it was news cameras. It was so many people down in Galveston wanting to know the Juneteenth story, because now it's a national holiday, federal holiday. And I mean, it was people everywhere. Everybody could have had an interview, girl. Everybody, because it was so many news stations from all around the world, not just national. It was from all over the world who were here. And again, for them to only make one person the face of Juneteenth, I don't agree with that. And sometimes I get a little upset about it. Now, I love that person, but they weren't the only ones to try to get Juneteenth a national holiday. So hopefully, before I go on to glory, true story will be written about Galveston, and it's you know the way that we tried for, like I said, decades to get Juneteenth recognized as a national holiday. you know so yeah, but
Yeah.
I was happy.
So you mentioned again when we were emailing, right? You mentioned an experience you had at the National Museum of African American History and Culture in DC, where you were disappointed by kind of the minimal, exhibit that they had on Juneteenth, where it's not, to you, it's not really representing the significance, right, of the day. Why do you think that was the case, and like what can be done in these kind of institutions to better represent how important that day was?
Trust me, now I got a chance to go to that museum when it first opened. And I was in DC with Houston Mass for our national convention, Gospel Music Workshop of America. Our convention was in DC. So that's how I was able to go to the museum, because I was in DC that summer. And it just so happened that was the summer, when Juneteenth became the holiday. And so I'm there and I'm excited because we started from the top and worked our way down, okay, instead of starting with everybody because there was so many people there and trying to go up. So we started from the top and then worked our way down. And so of course when we get to Juneteenth, and because I'm excited because I'm like, I'm from Galveston and going off this to see, and like I said, it wasn't what I thought it would be. I do know that they had got an artifact from the Galveston Historical Foundation, if I'm not mistaken. It was a pair of chains or something to that effect, or I can't remember exactly what it was, but they had got that, and it was that. And like a little write-up thingy, like in one, what do you want to call it? Like display case. Because have y'all gotten a chance to go there yet?
I
Yeah, I've
haven't
been.
been yet.
Okay. But you know what I'm talking about? Like they have display cases and and you go and you walk through. So, of course, you know how they have the rooms where you can go in the room and record your reactions to some of the stuff. And so I told them, I was very disappointed. I was like, yeah, this ain't, y'all need to do better, blah, 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 blah. I never heard anything back from them, by the way. But I am a member of the museum, and I pay my little money, but it was just disheartening because it was kind of like, it was like an afterthought that they kind of just threw it together. Hopefully if I get a chance to go again, which I do want to do because I didn't have time to fully, enjoy the museum. But hopefully the next time I go, they have expanded it and, put some more artifacts in there, or more information and emphasize Galveston is the birthplace. Don't just put Juneteenth with, it came in, because I remember too when Blackish, did you see the episode of Blackish when they did like the little Juneteenth thing?
I can't remember.
I
I
watched
feel like
that.
I watched it, but I don't remember.
Me too.
It was like a cartoon. They did, remember
Narration.
Black?
Yeah, it was a narration, right?
Yeah, it was a narration and it had it like a cartoon. But they was like, they came to Texas. Why you couldn't say Galveston, Texas? Like they had it where they went on a boat and they washed ashore. They went ashore in Texas. What part of Texas?
Put some respect on Galveston. Come on now.
Yeah. Some respect on our name. That's all we, and that was how it was when I went to the museum. I'm like, y'all need to focus more on Galveston and have some of the relics and stuff, pictures of past celebrations of
Mm.
Galveston, birthplace of Juneteenth. That's what I need from y'all. And y'all can get it from our local library, Rosenberg Library. Got everything up there. You see what I'm saying? Like, why is it so hard for y'all to talk about Galveston? So, of course, when it became a holiday, like I said, everybody was here, child. Everybody was here. Everybody wanted to interview you. Everybody wanted to talk. You know what I'm saying? But it's still now not, to me, it still isn't relevant enough to where people truly understand that Galveston is the birthplace of Juneteenth, not Fort Worth, Texas, not New York, not none of those places. It's Galveston, Texas. Period. It makes me laugh. But like I said, I'm very passionate about my hometown and our history because we are the ones who have lived this history. It's too many people who have done things, advocated, written about, talked about,
Mm.
did stuff, and for us to be skipped over in this story, because I'm telling y'all, go look up that episode of Blackish and how they just do, when they came ashore to Texas. What? And it's just like, why don't y'all talk a little bit more? Talk about General Gordon, talk about these black soldiers. You see what I'm saying? Like,
Mhm.
tell the full story. Don't half-ass tell it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you because when you hear other like stories from American history, like you were mentioning Paul Revere, well, what are the other ones, Lewis and Clark? I feel like they go into like there's quite
Yeah,
some detail when they're retelling
yeah,
some of those
yeah.
stories.
Yeah, they
So,
Yes.
said that they was
Oh
from
no.
Europe or from wherever, and they had a dog and a cat, and their mama was this, that, and
Listen.
the other,
No.
and they
They
grew
go
up
into
and they
so much. They go into so much
yeah,
detail. I was listening to a podcast where it was talking about like one of the most important battles between the Union soldiers and Confederate soldiers, and how it came down to General Lee had written orders and somebody dropped it. And some volunteer Confederate soldiers picked up that piece of paper and they were able to use that to strategize and like stop the Confederate soldiers from advancing into Union territory. Like, do
Mhm.
you understand that much detail about a missing piece of paper?
Right.
Here,
Exactly.
but here it's like
Exactly.
we're really loose on the details.
Exactly. And that's all we want. We just want some respect about, our part of this history. That's it. And I don't think that's too much to ask. We're not saying that ain't no one else can celebrate Juneteenth and nobody else can say we've been celebrating Juneteenth too since, but you weren't celebrating it before us because it happened there first. So how you gonna claim it when it happened where we at? Where they do that at?
So, speaking of celebration, right? If somebody wants to properly, honor and celebrate, I think everybody is, we're all still learning to different degrees about Juneteenth. So, what would you suggest, for people who really want to like learn and authentically celebrate Juneteenth?
I think, first of all, again, learning the whole complete story of Juneteenth, start there. And
Mm-hmm.
then, of course, have your programs, have reenactments of, that day if you can, to visualize those things. Have reenactments of, like every year, Reedy Chapel AME Church, which was the first African Methodist Episcopal church in the state of Texas, that was like the church where all the Black people were going to, and that was like the sounding board per se, like, well, I'm going to Reedy because Reedy gonna have the news, and so when they found out, they went to the town square, which was at the old county courthouse on 21st Street, and they were there and they got the word, we free. So once those people, those congregants heard that, they marched from the courthouse, which is like a block or two away from their church on Broadway, and they walked together to the church and they celebrated and thanked God for them being free. And so they reenact that every single year. And so they do that walk, and then they have a program at their church where it's singing, Negro spiritual songs and even, gospel songs. And they have people who talk about them. The Buffalo Soldiers are there, different people who reenact or can tell the Juneteenth story. Do those kind of things. Yes, it's all fun to have like a music festival or, a picnic in the park like we do and stuff like that. But it's time that we really truly start learning the true history of Juneteenth. So I would start there. Learning about it, reading as much as you can about Juneteenth. Everything now is at your fingertips. You can Google Juneteenth and 1,000,000,000 stories will come up, but again, we have Rosenberg Library, oldest library in the state of Texas, that has archives of everything that Galveston has ever done. Like I said, the Galveston County Daily News archived, history of things that have happened throughout the years in Galveston and stuff of that nature. And again, I'm not saying that other people can't have their traditions, their history, and when they started celebrating Juneteenth, but June 19th, 1865, was birthed in Galveston, Texas. You have to start there. Then you go into, okay, I'm from Philadelphia and we had our, we
Mm-hmm.
celebrate June. Okay, good. But it wasn't from June 19th, 1865. You see what I'm
I
saying?
love it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
That's all
love
I'm saying.
it.
Yes.
And for our listeners, who are not familiar, Galveston it's 45 minutes away from the city of Houston. So if you're visiting Houston, which I know a lot of our listeners like to do to party,
Yeah.
you can go down to Galveston. Like after finish your hookah in the club,
Yeah.
the next day when you're recovered, go down to Galveston. It's only 45
Yeah.
minutes. And
And
it's
we
very
do
pretty.
Yeah, and we do have a nice beach. Don't listen to Charles Barkley and people who talk about our beach. Now I know they talk about our beach, but see, I'm very passionate about that too. People don't understand. It's the Gulf of Mexico.
It is. It's not dirty. It's just muddy.
And the reason why, you know why? Because it's 66 different bodies of water that go into the Gulf of Mexico. Education and reading is fundamental. I understand. But of course, we don't have beaches like in Florida or California, which are oceans. And they have, the white sand and, not all their beaches are nice either. They got the Gulf of Mexico on one side of Florida too. But y'all don't talk about that. Y'all always want to talk about our water. So don't do that. And number one, why are you swimming in the beach anyway? Don't be swimming in the water because you're gonna drown. That's why we got swimming pools.
Yes, and also if you're in Houston visiting NASA, you're even closer to Galveston. So make it a
Exactly.
2-for-1. Make it a 2-for-1 outing. Take your kids to see, Galveston. There's other things that I will not advertise, but definitely take them to the birthplace of Juneteenth.
Yes. Yes. I mean, I'm telling you, and then you can make a full day. Galveston it's still some stuff in Galveston I haven't even gone to of historical. You know what I'm saying? Because you grow up in Galveston. I remember, and people be like, nah, of course, when I was young, be like, why y'all want to come to Galveston? Because, you're from here. But now it's like, bring your butt to Galveston, boo-boo. We got all kind of stuff. And, we have a walking tour. It's like, I'm telling you, if you go on visitgalveston.com or the Juneteenth listing and stuff, I'm telling you, you can come and you don't have to just wait to Juneteenth time. You can come anytime because we celebrate it all the time. We don't just wait to Juneteenth and be talking about Juneteenth. No, we do stuff all the time. So bring your people, bring your family, stay at Airbnb, in a hotel, wherever you need to do. Make a day out of it. But yeah, come to Galveston.
Thank you so much, Miss Angela, for joining us. This was a really, really educational and fun conversation, and we hope that our listeners, will learn a lot from it, but then also continue their own learning after this. So thank you so much.
Thank you. You're welcome. And again, thank y'all for, considering me to be on it. And, I was excited, but I had fun.